Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Living Manna Church. I'm Pastor Dave Sain, Senior Shepherd at Living Manna Church. Thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. We've got a Bible study ready for you. It's Wednesday night. It's our Wednesday night Bible study. We got some neat stuff to talk about tonight. I see some of you are coming online already. Awesome. Got some really exciting stuff to talk about. I think you'll be really encouraged with tonight's Bible study. We're in the book of 2 Thessalonians. We're going to get into chapter 2. We're going to talk about the topic of the great falling away. Let me just pop that up so you guys can actually see it. The title for today is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the great falling away. This is going to hopefully really make some connections for you to understand the actual context of what Saul's talking about, what the falling away means, the lawless one. We talked a little bit about that last week. Hopefully, as we're going through all of these studies, all of these pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together for you. And you're starting to see that this is really, the story is really about what has happened. Even though, most sort of end time studies, most sort of prophetic studies, or people looking at this, these texts today, are trying to place it in our day and age. And I get it. There's some things you could look at and you say, well, yeah, that's sort of happening today too. And I get that. But the meaning, the actual meaning of what was written by these apostles in their day was for their day, what was going on in their day. So you're going to see a little bit of that tonight. Let me just go ahead and say, if you are not subscribed yet, which I imagine everybody is, but if you're not, please subscribe to the channel. You'll get notified every time we go live. You'll get a notification. Hit that bell there so that you do. If you enjoyed the study, if you learned something, if you're encouraged, if you're fed, please share this with someone else. Let somebody else know about this study. We appreciate your support physically, prayerfully, financially. Thank you so much for all that you guys do. You enable us to continue to do what we do here at LMC, and that is ultimately just trying to get Yah's word out to people in an intelligible way that we can understand its context and how it affects us today. So with all of that, let's open up with a word of prayer. Then we'll jump right into this. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart that's willing to obey. In Yeshua's name, amen. Okay, so here we are. We're in the book of Thessalonians. We're in 2 Thessalonians. We did a whole bunch of review. Again, tonight's study, the subtitle for tonight is The Great Falling Away. And this should be really, really curious to everybody because you hear about this all the time. I've just recently saw some stuff online, some prophetic stuff where people are talking about the great falling away. And yet when you understand what it's actually about, it really does open up your eyes to the bigger story of what's going on. But let's start here. Up on your notes there, and this is stuff that we did last week. So just by way of a simple timeline, a little bit of review, not really much review, but just a couple of words about where we've come from. And guys, you could just go back and listen to all the old studies, all the previous things we did, if you want to go back and sort of review some of this stuff. But the simple timeline, and this is as simple as it gets. And I really think this is sort of what's in the mind of the Thessalonians or the people of the first century, especially the nations, the Gentiles, what's in their mind as they hear the gospel story, as they hear what Messiah said, as they hear what the Apostle Paul is saying and Peter and all the rest of them. Here is a simple timeline, and it contains just 3 points, but they're important. Number one, obviously, Messiah comes, right? The Messiah comes, he dies, the resurrection. And then from the time of the resurrection on is a time of hardship, a time of affliction. One of the words used, especially if you read the scriptures version, you'll hear the word affliction a lot. If you read King James or NIV or the other ones, you hear the word tribulation, which is really kind of where we get a lot of our modern day prophetic vocabulary from, is from the King James. That's why we talk about tribulation or great tribulation or the 3.5-year tribulation or 7-year tribulation. It comes really from that language, but affliction means the same word. So there's a time of hardship, a time of affliction leading up to the day of Yah. And remember, the day of Yah, again, in a more English version, we would say the day of the Lord. Right? That's something we are more familiar with. And again, you can go back and you can listen to our study on the day of the Lord or the day of Yah and what that really means biblically, as opposed to, kind of the way it's thought about today. Because it really is not the second coming. It is the coming of the Master, but the coming of the Master for wrath. It is the wrath of the Lamb of God. It is the destruction of Jerusalem. So you got the resurrection, you got about 40 years up to the time of the day of Yah. But when you read, like Matthew 24 and Luke 21, it kind of sounds like right after that event is the coming of the Master. After the days of those tribulation, the Son of Man will appear in the sky, with his angels and the blow of the shofar. And so Messiah's return. Now, this is a very elementary, very, beginner's ABC understanding of the timeline. We looked at this in more detail, and this is, I think, how the people of the first century were looking at it. And beyond the first century, the second century, the third century, people have been expecting that they are in tribulation themselves, and Messiah is going to appear at any moment because it's right after tribulation. This has been going on for a long, long time. For now, since the days of Yeshua, for almost 2,000 years. But here is another timeline, a more detailed timeline. And this is all last week's stuff, and all the notes are available. You guys can download it. It's on the it's in the description box there. You guys can download all these notes. But there are more pieces to the puzzle. So I left it color-coded. So if you can see on the first one, I color-coded it blue and, I guess teal and green, right? If I'm describing those colors correctly. 3 different concepts that describe the timeline. And I put those same colors into the second timeline that has a lot more information in it, that really kind of defines for us just how long this timeline is. It doesn't unfold the way that it appears in the language. It's not just one thing after the other. Though it may be just a sentence between 2 events, we now realize there could be 1,000 years between 2 events, or in this case, 2,000 years between 2 different sentences. And so the blue again, the resurrection, Messiah raises. Then the birth pangs, the tribulation starts, the tribulation for the saints, the believers. We're going to talk more about that today. And that occurs over a 40-year period, because it's about 40 years between the resurrection and the time of the destruction of Jerusalem. Then, of course, the destruction of Jerusalem occurs. And the temple is destroyed. The people are scattered. People come back to Jerusalem after that, and then eventually, by just about 100 years later, they wind up being totally banished from Jerusalem. But that begins a time known of as, or spoken of as, both in Revelation and in Matthew, as a time of great tribulation. And the diaspora to the nations. The gospel goes out to the nations. The Jews get scattered around the world. 2,000 years, or on the notes, you can see there are 1,952 years from the actual time of the temple destruction is where we are today. And so if we're correct, if we have the idea of the 7 days, 7,000 years, we're pretty close to the end of the 6th day, or the 6,000th year, and we are about to get into the 7th day, or the 7,000th year, which, if that's the day of rest, then we ought to be expecting, and I'm not saying like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but relatively soon, speaking in big terms, Messiah's return. Well, put it this way, Messiah's return is closer now than it has ever been before. And of course, that's that green color. Those are the same 3 markers that you have in this timeline. And all I did was take them and add some of the details so that you could see that there really is a long space of time between events, 40 years between Messiah and the destruction, 1,952 years between where the destruction was and where we are today. And then there's a kingdom. And of course, if we're correct on the math and the numbers, it's a 1,000-year kingdom. at the end of which is final judgment. So that's just timeline. We've gone through this before, but this is very important to understand if we're going to understand what Saul is actually talking about. Because the events that he's talking about, or where the Thessalonians are in this book, is right under that you got the blue for the resurrection, sort of that teal color. They're in the teal color. That's where they are. They're in the midst of that 40-year time period where they're suffering, where hard things are going on, even to the point that people are being killed. That's where the Thessalonians are. And again, this is all review for you guys. I know you guys know it, but for those that might be here for the first time, just a little bit of review. Guys, you can go back and you can check out the older studies, and you'll get all of this stuff in great, great, great detail. So here we are in 2 Thessalonians, and I want to start at verse 4. Now, we went over verse 4 last week, but I want to go back a little bit, and I want to really take apart verses 4 through from chapter 1, verses 4 all the way to the end, and then we'll get into chapter 2. So here is just a little bit of the narrative so that you understand they are in the midst of tribulation. They are in the midst of persecution. The early church for the first 40 years was persecution. They were under great peril, no matter where they went, no matter where the apostles went, no matter where the disciples went, no matter what congregation they were in, they were dealing with hardships wherever they were. So here is chapter 1 and verse 4. And I want you to notice, so they're in this tribulation, right? Saul is the author here. And he's a pastor. He's a shepherd. He's an apostle. He's a shepherd. He's a servant to this congregation. And like any good shepherd, whatever your congregation is going through, or when you speak to someone, whatever issue they're going through, you want to try to encourage that individual. You want to say something that is encouraging to them, but at the same time, share truth with them. You don't just want to encourage for the sake of encouragement. You want to encourage, but you want to encourage with truth. And that's exactly what Saul does while they are in the midst of all this hardship and trial and all these things that are going on all around them. Chapter 1. And what he does is he breaks his encouragement up into two pieces. And I use two different colors there so you can see the two different pieces. There's a part 1 and there's a part 2. And it's important that we understand this, that he is actually speaking about two different events, if you would. So here's chapter 1, verse 4. We just skipped a couple of the opening verses. We read them a couple times already. So here's verse 4. He says, "So that we ourselves boast of you among the assemblies of Elohim, for your endurance and belief in all your," and there it is in blue. There it is in blue. What are they going through? Persecutions and afflictions. What's another word for all that? Tribulation. They're going through tribulations. Your persecutions and your afflictions, which you are bearing. Clear evidence. And going through this, he says, is clear evidence of the righteous judgment of Elohim, in order that you be counted worthy of the reign of Elohim, for which you also suffer, since Elohim shall rightly repay with affliction those who afflict you. Now, I stopped there. There's more to the verse there, but I want you to notice something. He's talking about whatever affliction, whatever hardship they're going through, right? And he's telling them, and this is encouraging. I mean, listen, if somebody's messing with you, if somebody's doing something terrible to you, and your shepherd, somebody of some sort of spiritual authority, or somebody that you trust, says to you, hey, listen, whatever these people, whatever hardship they're putting you through, believe me, that's going to come back to them. Now, I guess that's kind of tit for tat, but it is encouraging to know that the people that are really doing you wrong, or they're gonna have in kind. What goes around comes around, and that's what he's telling them. The affliction that you are being afflicted with, or the tribulation that you are being tribulated with, is going to come back on those who are tribulating you. So the real question here is, and there's an A and a B part to this we'll look at in a second, but the real question in my mind is, who's tribulating them? Who's who's causing the affliction. Now, certainly, they got the people, their own culture. If we're talking about Gentiles, their own culture they're coming out of, they're looking at them as Jews. But there's a bigger affliction, even though that's affliction, even though their own families are rejecting them. And we can all kind of attest to all that because we go through some of that even today. There's something else going on here that's much, much bigger. Because the affliction that he's talking about has already been spoken to us. It's already been prophesied. It's already been spoken about at great length. And we need to identify it to understand what's actually going on there in the first century at the congregation of Thessalonica, and not just Thessalonica, Ephesus and Sardis and Smyrna and so forth and so on. So again, verse 6 there in the teal, since Elohim shall rightly repay with affliction those who afflict you. Again, the question, who's doing the afflicting? For 40 years, it's pretty much the same group of people who are doing the afflicting wherever the message goes. Now, yes, Rome eventually steps in and Rome persecutes the Netzarim, but that doesn't happen for some time down the line. The afflicting that's going on now is predominantly coming from Judaism, from Pharisaic Judaism, from the Pharisees, from the Sadducees, from whatever synagogue that they happen to start off with, whatever synagogue Saul goes to, and Gentiles come and Jews come and they hear the message and they wind up getting kicked out or removed or beaten up or whatever the circumstance is. The bulk of the affliction, the bulk of the hardship that these people are enduring is coming from Judaism. Or more accurately, Pharisaic Judaism, Judaism of the first century. And that's really, it may sound like I'm splitting hairs here, but I'm not. This is very, very important information. So, and what's going on, this idea that Judaism is going to afflict or cause tribulation all the way up to the destruction of the temple, Messiah has already talked to us about. And we've read some of these verses before, so it might be a little bit of review for you, but follow along with me. We're going to look at some, I'm going to put some PDP versions. Remember, any other color you see is sort of me just highlighting the scripture, but yellow is me trying to emphasize or giving you the PDP version, my sort of little commentary on it to maybe make the verse a little bit more clearly understood. So here it is. Here's Matthew chapter 23 and verse 31. Here's the affliction. Messiah told them affliction was coming. Affliction, tribulation, suffering, whatever you want to call it. Messiah told them that this was coming. Here's verse 31 of Matthew 23. Thus you bear witness against yourselves. Excuse me, guys. Let me just resituate myself here a little bit. A little awkward. There we go. And let me make this a little bit bigger for you guys so you guys can actually see it wherever you are. Okay, so thus you bear witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who did murder the prophets. This is the whole chapter of the woes. Woe to you, Pharisees, scribes, blah, 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 blah. Yeshua is ticked at them, and he's really ripping them. And he tells them, you bear witness against yourselves that you are the children, the sons of those who did murder the prophets. And you fill up the measure of your fathers. You're just like your fathers. You're going to do exactly what your fathers did. You're going to murder the prophets. Verse 33, serpents, brood of adders, vipers, snakes. And I put in there in yellow so that you can make the connection with what's going on in Thessalonians. These serpents, these brood of adders, what are they? They are the afflictors. The Thessalonians, the disciples, the people of the way would be the afflictees, but it is the brood of vipers. It is the Sadducees. It is the priests. It is the scribes. It is the leaders of the synagogue. It's the presidents of the synagogue. It's the rabbis. They are the afflictors. And he tells them, how would you escape? Escape what? Well, first of all, Yah afflicting you, but ultimately he's talking about the ultimate judgment here, the judgment of Gehenna, the judgment of the lake of fire. And Saul is in the chapter that we just opened up with there in chapter 1. He's going to talk about this too, but I want to sort of put that aside. We're going to deal with that another day because we got so much information to go over for today. Verse 34 says, because of this, See, I send you prophets. Now he's talking future, from Messiah's time future. I send you prophets and wise men and scholars of Scripture. Some of them you shall kill and impale, crucify, and some of them you shall flog in your congregations and persecute, tribulate, persecute from city to city, so that on you should come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the dwelling place and the slaughter place. Truly I say to you, and here's the deal. Listen to what Messiah is saying. All this stuff that you've done is going to come back on you. And actually what he's telling them is all the stuff from all the ages, all the things ever prophesied. This is if there's ever a bad generation in which to be the afflictor, this is the bad generation in which to be an afflictor, to be a Caiaphas or an Annas or a Pharisee, because you are about to suffer the wrath of literally 1,000 years of afflicting is now going to come on your head. And he says, truly I say to you, all of this shall come upon this generation. Now, we went over this, lots and lots of times before, so this should be not be unfamiliar to most of you. Again, if it is, you need to go back and you need to listen to some of the other studies. Okay, so that's Yeshua clearly telling us affliction, tribulation, suffering is coming for the disciples who are going to come in his name, including Messiah himself, who is also going to be murdered by these people. Here's Matthew chapter 24, verses 9 through 12, where Yeshua again tells us affliction is coming. Excuse me. It says, then they, and the they he is speaking about is not our day. He's not talking about our time in Matthew 24. He's talking about the disciples' time and the destruction of Jerusalem. So the they he is referring to is Judaism, Pharisaic Judaism, Sadduceic Judaism, the priests, the people of the synagogues, the rabbis. Then they shall deliver you up to, and there it is, affliction, and kill you. And you shall be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many who, well, if they are the scribes and the Pharisees and the priests, and then many, the people that they influence, the other Jews, the people of the synagogues, the people that are led by the priests, the people that are led by the rabbis. If they see their rabbis doing it, well, then what are they going to do? And then many other Jews, the priests who are leading them, the other people, they shall stumble. And they, the Jews, the other people being led, shall deliver up one another, the people being delivered up are the disciples, whether Jew or Gentile. They are the ones that are being ratted out by their own family members, their own friends, their own synagogue members. They shall deliver up one another, other Jews, former Gentiles, the people of the way, and shall hate one another. That is, Jew hating Jew, because one believes in Messiah, one doesn't. One is allowing the Gentiles to come in and have faith just like them. The others do not like it. And this is really important, and many false prophets, even, and we're going to get a little bit more information on this in just a second, even false messiahs shall rise up and lead many astray. Many who? Many of the Jews and even the Gentiles who are coming into faith. Those Jews who have understood who Messiah is, they themselves could even be led astray by this group of people, the many. Verse 12, and because of the increase of lawlessness. And when it says increase of lawlessness, it's not talking about our day. And even though there's no doubt we have increased in lawlessness all over our culture, and I could see how some people could kind of take that and put it into today's perspective. I get that. Yeah, it kind of does fit. We are a lawless people. Just look at what's going on all around us, everywhere. And yet, while that may be true, that is not what this is actually talking about. because the lawlessness this is talking about is about people who should know the law, who should be living the law, who should be walking in the instructions in righteousness. But because there is lawlessness in them, why? Because they're listening to the many, the priests, the scribes, the ones who are leading them, and the people are being confused and led astray, even some of the disciples themselves. And because of their instruction, which is lawless, which is outside of what Moses has actually said, their non-compliance to Yah's instruction, the love of many who? Of many of the Jews, many of the people in the synagogues, many of the people in the temple, many of the people in Jerusalem, many people in the cities and the towns all over the place that are starting to hear this gospel, the love of many of them shall grow cold. And of course, that leads up to the destruction of the temple. Now, this goes on. So here's Messiah warning us about what's coming, telling us it is coming. Tribulation is coming. Hardship is coming. The Thessalonians are going through it. So who's the tribulator in the story of Thessalonians? The Jews are. The scribes, the Pharisees, the establishment, Pharisaic Judaism are the tribulators for the first 40 years. They're the ones persecuting the way. Rome doesn't get into it till later on. It's Judaism, it's Israel that is doing it. Here's Acts chapter 15, verses 1 and to 2a. I don't want to get into all of Acts chapter 15. We've talked about this before. But listen to this. It says, and certain men, so here's Saul, right? He's ministering to Jew and Gentile. Talk to them about Messiah. They're coming to faith. It says, and certain men came from Judah. What men? Pharisees. Pharisees came and were teaching the brothers, unless you are circumcised according to the practice of, now I know when we read it, it says according to the practice of Moses, but this isn't Moses' practice that they're initiating here. This is Pharisaic Judaism's practice. They call it Moses' practice, but we know enough now to realize, no, they're not doing what Moses said to do. They're doing what the scribes have told them to do. They're following what's called halakha, which is just a man-made rule, a man-made law, something added to what Moses said. So really what this is saying is that they are telling the Gentiles, unless you follow our pre-established Pharisaic Judaism pattern of being right with God, and that is, of course, being circumcised, according to the practice of, not Moses, but the practice of Judaism, the practice of the halakha, you are unable to be saved. So when Saul, and how do Saul and Barnabas take this? Well, this is affliction. This is hardship. This is a tough thing, to tell somebody, listen, you have to do it this way if you want to be right. Where Saul is telling them, listen, you need to believe. You need to have your heart circumcised. Now, guys, let me just add this addendum here. This is not to say that circumcision wasn't practiced. What they told is the initial Gentiles who were coming in, no, you don't have to follow the halakha of Judaism. You need to come in, you need to learn. And when you read through Acts chapter 15, they tell them you need to go to synagogue. You need to go to service each week, and you need to learn about Moses. Moses will be preached. Well, if you go and you learn about Moses for the next 10 or 15 years and you truly are walking in Yah, one of the things you're going to learn is circumcision. And even if you don't decide to get circumcised, what's going to eventually happen is when you have a child, you're going to want to be obedient to Yah, and you're going to circumcise your child. And we know this as a historic fact because by the 4th century, we have notes from the quote-unquote early church fathers who were ticked off at the Netzarim because he said to them, the Netzarim they believed in Messiah, but they lived like Jews. They kept Sabbath, they kept the feast days, and they circumcised their children. That's not to say. So what he's telling them is these people that are just coming in, no, they don't have to get circumcised. They need to come in first, and they need to learn. They don't have to follow the halakha. They don't have to follow the man-made Judaism laws. They have to learn. But I guarantee you that, and we know this again as a point of history, by the time, 10, 20, 30 years in, they wind up circumcising their children. Now, I know this is not what you're going to hear from most of the people out there. Just going to say, no, you don't have to be circumcised. But that just doesn't bear out in history. That's not the way it happened. And I should have maybe put up some historical notes, but maybe I'll do that another time. We've done that before, so maybe you guys have seen it. So either way, So what happens with this when they say these Gentiles, they're now being oppressed, they're now being afflicted. They're saying, listen, you want to follow Messiah? You got to do this. Wait, I got to do what? What? I got to do what? Why does that make me? I get it, man. I get that. I really, really get that. I would have said, what? Are you kidding me? Well, here it is. So when Paul and Barnabas heard this, it says they had no small dissension and dispute. Let's translate that into modern language. They argued with them. They fought with them. They said, heck no, what are you talking about? These Pharisees were tribulating, persecuting, causing affliction on the Gentiles. So we see what Yeshua is saying. False prophets were going to come up, and they were. It doesn't end there. Here's Acts chapter 9 and verse 1. It says, but Shaul, now this is even before Acts chapter 15, Shaul was one of the persecutors. He was one of the afflictors. We went over this a couple of weeks ago. And it says, but Shaul still breathing threats and murders. So this is some pretty hairy stuff we're talking about here. Against the taught ones of the master, having come to the high priest, asked from him letters to the congregations of Damascus, the synagogues of Damascus, so that if he found any who were of the way, whether men or women, to bring them bound to Jerusalem. The Sanhedrin, the temple priest, were sending out people to afflict, to cause persecution to the believers, whether Jew or proselytes or Gentiles who were beginning to come in. They were all fair game when these people went out. Here's Acts chapter 12 and verse 1, more persecution, more tribulation. And about that time, Herod the king put forth his hands to do evil to some of the assembly, some of the congregation. And he killed Yaakov, the brother of John, with the sword. He gets beheaded. And seeing that it was pleasing to the Jews. So who's all for the persecution? Who's all for the tribulating? Who's all for the afflicting of the people of the way? The Jews are. Pharisaic Judaism is all for it. Pharisaic Judaism are the tribulators. He proceeded further to arrest Kepha as well, and this happened during the days of unleavened bread, just to give you a little time reference there. So, just again and again, if you pay really close attention, the words Yeshua said in Matthew 23 and Matthew 24, as you read the book of Acts, are coming true. And they are coming true also in the days of the Thessalonians. Here's Galatians chapter 2, verse 2, because the tribulation continues. Galatians chapter 2, verses 2 through 4. And Saul says, and I went up by revelation and laid before them that good news which I proclaim among the nations, among the Gentiles. He says, when I went to Jerusalem, I told them what I was doing. But separately to those who were esteemed, lest somehow I run or had run in vain. But not even Titus, who was with me, though a Greek, a Gentile, was compelled to be circumcised. Well, why would he be compelled to be circumcised? Because the Pharisees were pushing it. If you want to consider yourself right with God, you must follow our rules. Well, guys, I'd have done the same thing, even if I was Timothy or Titus, and I decided, okay, I want to get circumcised. You know what? I really want to follow you. I think this is really what I should do. If I had Pharisees come up from Jerusalem or wherever they were to whatever synagogue or place I was at and told me I needed to be part of them, I would have done the same thing he did. No, I'm not going to do it. And you know why I'm not going to do it? I'm not going to do it because you told me to do it. That's why I'm not going to do it. That's what's being said here. And I get it, man. I'm with Titus. I'm with him. I wouldn't have done it either. Just to spite them, I would not have done it. And that's what he does here. Though a Greek, was compelled to be circumcised according to Judaism, according to the halakha, to be circumcised. But what were they? Look at what it says. They were false brothers. These weren't people that were really walking in Yah. These were tribulators. These were afflictors. Afflicting who? Afflicting the Gentiles and Jew alike, both, but afflicting them. These were false brothers, Jews, the way Yeshua tells it, Jews who were lawless and in whom the love of Yah had grown cold. The false brothers sneakily brought in. They came in under, we believe Messiah, but we want you to follow everything Pharisaic Judaism says. No, sorry, that's a problem. Who sneaked in to spy out our freedom, which we have in Messiah Yeshua, in order to enslave us. Not to enslave us with God's law, because that's how many people read it, to enslave us with Pharisaic Judaism. That's the affliction that is being talked about here. Here's Galatians, also chapter 2, and here's verses 11 through 13. It says, "And when Kepha had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was at fault. For before some came from Yaakov," and I don't know if it's what Yaakov he's talking about here. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not really sure anybody is. But whatever Yaakov this is, he says he was eating with the Gentiles. But when they came, whenever these Pharisees came up from Jerusalem, these false brethren that he had just talked about in chapter 2, the earlier verses, whenever these false brethren who were spreading the halakha, who were spreading Judaism, who were spreading Pharisaic Judaism, confusing and afflicting the nations, and obviously the other Jews, because the other Jews are being afflicted by this too, including Peter. But when they came, the Pharisees, the lawless ones, in whom the love of Yah had grown cold, he began to withdraw and separate himself. We're talking about Peter. Peter got influenced early on by these people. And I get it, because that's how they lived for so long. It's hard to think about what we're going through, guys. We are trying to unlearn so much. And it's difficult sometimes because you're so used to doing things a certain way. And then all of a sudden you see the freedom that's in Messiah. And you say, no, that's not what I'm supposed to do. But it's hard sometimes. Sometimes we fall back into those patterns. And that's exactly what Peter did here. And not just him. It says he began to withdraw himself in fear. This is in fear of those of the circumcision, who again want these people to be their disciples, follow our halakha, follow our traditions. Now remember what Yeshua said about the traditions. You wash your hands, you do this, you do that, and many such other things you do, and you make Yah's word void. That's what they were doing. And that's what they were doing to the Gentiles, and that's what they were doing also here to the Jews. It says, and the rest of the Yehudim, the rest of the Jews that were there with them, with the nations, the people of the Gentiles who were there fellowshipping together, they joined them in the hypocrisy. Do you know what this is? This is tribulation. This is affliction. And who are they being afflicted by? They are being afflicted by Pharisaic Judaism, by temple Judaism, by synagogue Judaism. That's who they are being afflicted by. They joined them in the hypocrisy, again, because of the lawless ones from Judaism, so that even Barnabas of all people, was led away in their hypocrisy. But when I saw, this is Saul, but when I saw that they were not walking straight according to the truth of the good news, I said to Kepha before them all, if you being a Jew live as the nations, amongst the nations, you are one people now. You are a brand new person. Obedience through faith. And not as the Yehudim, obedience through action to get right with God. See, people read this and they say, well, Peter was living as the nations, which means he was probably sitting there eating, pork chops. No, he wasn't. Believe me, he was not eating pork chops. He was not eating a ham sandwich. He was not living as the nations do. He was living in freedom, in faith, instead of work, a works-based Judaistic faith that was empty to begin with. That was not according to the word of Moses. So when it says that you live as the nations and not as the Yehudim, again, that doesn't mean that they just gave up all the commandments and all the things and they just started living like the Gentiles, which is what most would kind of read that and say, oh, look, it says he started living like the nations. That's not what it means. He says, like the people of the nations who have now come by faith, not by works, so that no man can boast. That's what he's referring to here. And not as the Yehudim, not as Judaism, not as the established religion based on man-made laws or man-made halakha. He says, why do you compel now the nations, and here it is, to compel the nations in this freedom of faith to now live as Pharisaic Jews, Yehudim. So you really need to understand. Now, hopefully the PDP version there makes this a little bit more clear to you as you're reading this, as you go through this, because people get all kind of twisted and don't really understand the whole idea of circumcision, when to circumcise and when not to circumcise, what all of that's about. And maybe we'll go over this another time in more detail. But what I want you to get out of this is tribulation. This is affliction. Because what happens to you as a Jew if you see these guys? It says they had fear from these people. Fear from what? That they get excommunicated, that they wouldn't be allowed in the temple, that they'd be an outcast. That's tribulation. That's fear that they might be dragged before the Sanhedrin. That's fear. This is what was going on in all the congregations and in many, many different ways. And who's doing it? Pharisaic Judaism is doing it. Pharisaic Judaism is behind this. Guys, it's hard to quit an old habit like that. It really is. And it took a long, long time for that to kind of stick. Here's more affliction. Acts chapter 22. So we're going to get a little window into here, even later on, even many, many years later, how the Jewish community in the temple, what they felt about the Gentiles. Now, these are people that said they believed in Messiah or were okay with listening about the Messiah, about Yeshua. But when they hear Yah is also bringing in the Gentiles, oh my goodness, these people freak out. Listen to Acts chapter 22. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but I invite you to read it. Acts chapter 22, verses 21 through 23. It says, and he said to me, go, because I shall send you far from here to. So Saul's given his testimony, right? He's given his testimony when he had the whole Damascus Road thing. He's there to persecute all the way, and he meets Yeshua. He blinds him, all the rest of that. And he says, and a voice spoke to him and he said to me, go, because I shall send you, Saul, far from here to the nations. If you read it maybe in a King James or NIV or one of the other versions, to the Gentiles. Right? So they're all listening to this testimony, and he's in the temple. He's in the temple proper, in the court of men. There's thousands and thousands of people there. It's during a festival. All sorts of things are going on. And Saul is talking in Hebrew, so everybody understands what he's saying. And he's telling them, Yah sent me to the nations. And look at their response. And they were listening to him until this word. Once he said, the nations, the Gentiles, the people we hate. And then they lifted up their voice saying, away with such a one from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. Kill him. As they were shouting and tearing their garments and throwing dust into the air. These people have a riot. They literally had a riot. Why? Because Yah sent Saul to the nations to bring the nations in. They freaked out. That is affliction. That is tribulation. Of course, Saul winds up getting arrested and all the other. You guys can read the rest of the chapters there and get the whole story. We'll go over it another time. Here's Revelation chapter 2. So it doesn't end, there in the book of Acts. This thing continues on for the next 40 years. For 40 years, this is going on until after the destruction of Jerusalem. Then Rome steps in, and then Rome begins persecuting. But that doesn't happen for a while. Here's Revelation chapter 2 and verse 8. And it says, now listen real close. And to the messenger of the assembly of Smyrna. Now it's a synagogue in Smyrna, but Smyrna's not Jerusalem. Smyrna's amongst the Gentiles. It's amongst the nations. It's a congregation made up of both Jew and Gentile, people that walk in the Master. So you got to understand that, I guess, just first off. It says, "And to the messenger of the assembly in Smyrna write," this says the first and the last, the Aleph and the Tav, so that's the connection, "who became dead and came to life. I know your works and pressure." Again, you read this in some other versions and it doesn't say pressure, it says afflictions. "I know your tribulations." So here it is, he's talking to the people at Smyrna and he's telling them, I know the hardships you guys are going through. I know the oppression that you are facing. I know the affliction that you guys are enduring. He says, I know the pressure, the afflictions of tribulation and poverty, and yet you are rich. And here it is. Who's afflicting them? "And the blasphemy of those who say they are Yehudim, Jews, and are not, but instead are of the congregation of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer." He doesn't tell them tribulation's done. He doesn't tell them it's over. He doesn't tell them I'm just going to, wipe them out and that's it. I'm going to get rid of them in your local congregation. He says, "See, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison." So who's behind this affliction? Who's the one behind the Pharisaic Judaism affliction of the people of the way, both Jew and Gentile, this brand new nation of people that are being birthed? Who's behind it? But they are of the congregation of Satan. "Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. See, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison in order to try you, and you shall have pressure 10 days. I think this is a reference to the 10 emperors who come after the whole destruction of Jerusalem, but another study for another day. "Be trustworthy until death." Listen to what, guys, think about it. Listen to what Messiah is saying. How are you guys going to get out of this? Death. You're going to endure this until death. "And I shall give you the crown of life." So there's no promise to just that, immediately, Yah's going to deal with it. The promise is resurrection. So again, and we can look through, another 10 different verses that all say the same thing. Who or what was the group that was doing the afflicting for the first 40 years leading up to the destruction of the temple? Pharisaic Judaism was. Pharisaic, Sadduceic, the temple priests, the scribes, the rabbis, the presidents of synagogues. That's where the affliction was coming from. Towards who? Towards both Jew, that is coming to faith in Messiah, and Gentile, who are coming to faith in Messiah. And just a venom, an absolute venom to the Gentiles who are coming into faith, them wanting to bring them under Pharisaic Judaism. And yet, Saul tells us in 1 Thessalonians there, let's look at it again, 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 6. "Since Elohim shall rightly repay with affliction those who afflict you." Again, Matthew chapter 23 and verse 36, who's he talking about? Yeshua says the same thing. "Truly I say unto you, all this shall come upon this generation." So there's a two-part thing here. Messiah is talking about those who are afflicted and that Yah will afflict those who afflict you. And verse 7, the very next part of it. So here's the first one. Yah is going to rightly, I put it up into part 1 and part 2 on the notes there. Hopefully you guys can see it. So part 1 is, I know you're getting afflicted. I know you're going through hard times and trouble. Yah is going to pay with affliction those who afflict you. When? Yeshua said, this generation. All of this is going to come upon this generation. Okay, that's part 1. There's a second part to this, though. So he's telling them, these people that are doing all of this harm to you, that are causing all these problems, that are kicking you out from synagogue to synagogue, chasing you down, stoning you, all the rest of that, their day's coming. Their day is coming. God will afflict them. But the second part of it, and we're not going to get it too deep into this tonight because we just don't have time to do it, but the second part of it is verse 7. And verse 7 is, so let's read again from verse 6. Since Elohim shall rightly repay with the affliction those who afflict you. Verse 7, and also, and to give you who are afflicted rest. Well, what did Yeshua just tell the church in Sardis about getting through the affliction? You're going to die, and I will give you the crown of life. Same thing Saul says here. And to give you who are afflicted rest. What rest? Well, he's talking about the seventh day rest. He's talking about the Shabbat rest. He's talking about sleeping in the Mass. He's talking about death. And he shall give you who are afflicted rest. Again, Revelation 2, verse 10, be trustworthy until death. And I shall give you the crown of life against those who say they are Jews, but are actually of the synagogue of Satan, the temple, the synagogues, rabbis, etc., all the people we already talked about. To give you rest with us when the Master Yeshua is revealed from heaven with his mighty messengers. So when is this rest he's talking? When is the end of this rest? When Messiah is revealed. So in verse 6, he tells us, I'm going to afflict those who afflict you. Yeshua says, upon this generation. But then in verse 7, he says, you're going to get rest, and the ultimate thing is going to come when Messiah comes, when you are resurrected. At the end, when he comes with his angels, with his mighty messengers, verse 8, in flaming fire to take vengeance on those who do not know Elohim and on those who do not obey the good news of our Master Yeshua Messiah, who shall be punished with everlasting destruction from the presence of the Master and from the glory of his strength, who when he comes to be glorified in his set-apart ones and to be admired among all those who believe in that day, because you are our witnesses to you, and because our witness to you was believed. Now, I put it in sort of that teal color because I'm actually, I don't want to even get into this because this is big. We will get into it. I promise we'll get into it because this is going to be a big topic in chapter 2. So I don't want to deal with it in too much detail right now, except to say that there's two promises. So as a shepherd, he's given them two reasons to be encouraged. One is, vengeance is mine, says the Lord, right? Those who are afflicting you are going to get afflicted. Who's afflicting you? Pharisaic Judaism is afflicting you. So who's going to get afflicted? Pharisaic Judaism, the temple, the priests, the scribe, they're going to get afflicted. And then he gives them this bigger thing that ultimately nobody's getting away with anything. You're gonna rest in the Master. You're gonna see his coming. And then this whole thing with flaming vengeance and fire. We'll get into that. Because that's a really intriguing concept and idea that he's talking about. We touched upon it a little bit last week, but I really want to set aside just a study, a Wednesday night just to do that, because there's so much scripture we got to go through to really understand what he's talking about in the timeline of events, because that's how we need to understand all of this stuff, is as a timeline. So for right now, this second part, the part B, if you will, or the part 2, I want you to take it, put it in the back of your memory banks, in the back of your spiritual thinking. We're going to get to it. This whole flaming vengeance on those who don't know Elohim and so forth. So, I mean, what does all that mean? What's he talking about? He's talking about here affliction and afflicting those, and now he's talking about vengeance and fire and this and that. We'll deal with it. So hold on. I know it's a cliffhanger. I'm already giving you a cliffhanger before we even get to the end. That's the cliffhanger for today. We'll get to that another day. But what I really want to get to is this affliction and afflicting those who afflict you, because that comes, verse 6 comes before verse 7. Just like in Revelation, as the Master tells them, be trustworthy until death, and I shall give you the crown of life. A, and then a B. Okay, so again, a whole other issue for a whole other time. We'll deal with that. I promise. Here's chapter 2 and verse 11. It says, so he's going on now. So not verse 11, verse 1. So that's the ending. There's a couple of more verses I kind of skipped. They're you can read them. I don't think I put them down here. But now chapter 2 comes on. And Saul's still talking about, he's still going to refer to the coming of the Master, because That's something that's important. And again, remember what they're thinking of. Down on the bottom there is that chart again. And if you guys can see it, here's that chart down here. It's got the three ideas. The Thessalonians are here. The Thessalonians are here. This hasn't occurred yet. But they're all concerned also about this, the coming of Messiah. All right, so chapter 2, verse 1 says, as to the coming of the Master, which is what he just spoke about in chapter 1, the last couple of verses. Again, we'll deal more with that later. As to the coming of our Master, Yeshua Messiah, and our gathering together to him, just like he talked about in 1 Thessalonians 4, same concept. We ask you, brothers, and I'm going to break this into two parts as well, instead of a 1 and a 2, so don't get confused. I'm going to break this into an A and B, and you can see on the notes there's two red letters, one's A and one's B. Two separate thoughts, connected to each other, but two separate thoughts. So he says, concerning our gathering together to him, we ask you, brothers, to A, or 1, not become easily unsettled in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as if the day of Yah has come. Now, hold on a second here. What's the day of Yah? We went over this. We did a whole study on the day of Yah. The day of Yah is the destruction of Jerusalem. The day of Yah is the wrath of the Lamb, is the Lamb coming in wrath to destroy, to afflict, here it is, to afflict the afflictors. So why would they be thinking the day of Yah has come? Well, Messiah told us, and he actually tells us here, evidently somebody, somewhere, and we know that this was going on in all the stuff that we just finished reading about the afflictors. They were sending people from Jerusalem. They were sending others. They had false brethren coming in. They had people, telling lies about circumcision, gathering disciples to themselves, putting fear on the disciples. All this affliction was going on. And don't you think they were also telling them other things like Messiah's already come, or there is another Messiah, or the day of Yah has already come? So here's these Thessalonians that are hearing this from other Jews, from Judaism, from Pharisaic Judaism. This has occurred. Messiah has come. And when we say Messiah has come, we need to really qualify that. But let's go into B, and then we'll go back to A, and we'll take a look at A. So that's the first thing. They're confused. Somebody has either written a letter, gone to them, sent word to them, that somehow they missed the day of Yah, and Messiah has come, and they're in a whirlwind of hurt. Number 3, or verse 3, part B. It says, "Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first." Before what? Before the day of Yah, or the day of the Lord is probably how most of us would be familiar with that. So what comes first? The day of Yah comes first. Then the coming of the Master. Remember, he's talking about him as to the coming of the Master, our gathering together with him. Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away, that is the title of what we got today, the falling away, is to come first. If it depends on what version you got, you may see the apostasy comes first. Absolutely correct word, nothing wrong with it. The apostasy is to come first, and the man of lawlessness. This goes back to the other two things that we just saw, part 1 and part 2. And the man of lawlessness is to be revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called Elohim, or that is worship, so that he sits as Elohim in the dwelling place. Now, again, that's the second part I don't want to deal with today. We'll deal with it later, because I really want to get into this falling away, this affliction, because you have to understand what that is first before you can understand what this son of perdition and all the rest of this stuff is, even though we kind of went over that a little bit already, talking about the lawless man. So you have some sort of context or pretext in which to understand it, but we're going to get into it in a little bit more detail. But let's concentrate on that blue part there. Not to become easily unsettled in mind or troubled by spirit, by a word or a letter as if from us, as the day of Yah has come. Let no one deceive you in any way, because the falling away must come first. All right, so we already know, the A part of it, they're in affliction already. We know they are. Saul said it multiple times. We just, from Yeshua's words all the way to what goes on in the book of Acts and beyond. So they're in affliction. Jerusalem, the temple, will be destroyed. We know that is a prominent theme that they are preaching in that day, very, very powerfully, with the whole thing with Stephen. We'll talk about that in a second as well. And they know that Messiah will return. Again, down on the bottom there, the very three simple concepts. Messiah comes, resurrection, the day of tribulation, the day of Yah, Messiah returns. We now know it's been a long time between these events, but they don't know that. They don't have this understanding yet. There's no 20/20 hindsight with them yet. Okay, so when he says, not to be upset with somebody sending you a letter or a word by us, what is he referring to? Well, he's referring to exactly what Messiah told them was going to happen. Matthew chapter 24 and verse 11. Look what Yeshua said would happen before the destruction of the temple. And many false prophets shall rise up and lead many astray. Well, what were they doing to the Thessalonians? They were leading them astray. So Saul has to now correct. He's got to now, redirect them back into truth. We talked about this stuff before, guys. Here it is. Let's put this back into perspective, because there are others coming from Jerusalem and all other places that are, feeding this other stuff to them. That's chapter 24, verse 11, verse 23, chapter 24. Listen to the master's words. And if anyone then says to you, look, here is the Messiah, or there, do not believe it, for false messiahs and false prophets shall arise, and they shall show great signs and wonders, as to lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones, like the people in Thessalonica. Affliction is coming on them because someone has given them false information, told them false things about a false Messiah who already came, and it's an error. It is affliction. It is wrong. And Saul's got to fix it. Verse 25, see, I have forewarned you. So if they say to you, look, he's out here in the desert. In other words, when he says he's out here in the desert, he's raising an army. That's what he's talking about. This Messiah is out in the desert and he's raising an army. Don't go out. Don't look. Or look, he's in the inner rooms. Look, he's at the temple. He's with the priest. Look, that's him. Do not believe it. So Messiah already warned that during this time of tribulation, there's going to be a lot of, you know what we would call it today? False news, fake news, right? A lot of fake news. You think CNN, MSNBC, CBS, you think they invented fake news? No, people were doing fake news Satan was doing fake news way before CNN. So here he is, Messiah's telling us this is going to happen. And what we are watching in Thessalonians is the product of it. They're confused. They had a letter, a word. Somebody came in between the time that Saul was there and told them, there's a Messiah. The Messiah has come. He's in the desert. He's working with the priest. He's building an army. Oh, he's come. The Messiah's come. Is this what Saul was talking about? And guys, there were many, many messiahs. You read the story of Gamaliel. Gamaliel tells us there was a whole bunch of messiahs before Yeshua came, and there was a whole bunch of messiahs after, or false messiahs after Yeshua came. As a matter of fact, by 70 AD, there are three main false messiahs that people followed. Eliezer bin Shimon, Yochanan or John of Gishala, and the third one was Simon bar Giora. These were the three guys who led three separate militaries fighting in Jerusalem, all for control, and then eventually wind up banding together and fighting the Romans as the Romans come to Jerusalem to destroy it. These men were all considered Mashiachs, Messiahs. And so people were spreading, the Messiah's come. He's going to save us from Rome. The Messiah is here. He's already come. The Messiah is in the desert and he's raising up an army. Well, people heard this. They got this. They woke up in the morning, they checked out their email and they got this thing that said, there's a Messiah in Jerusalem. And they're thinking, oh my goodness, did we miss it? Are we beyond it? What's happened? That's the context of 2 Thessalonians. So exactly what Messiah said was going to happen did happen. And it was happening in real time during that 40-year period. Again, this is news to the Thessalonians. False messiahs, they're out there. And they fell into it. They believed the fake news, or they weren't sure. Let's put it that way. They at least weren't sure. And now Saul's got to tell them, no. The master doesn't come. The return of the master doesn't come until the great falling away first. The finishing of that great falling away. That's got to happen first. And you got to understand what exactly that means. Again, let's read the verse again. Do not become easily unsettled in mind or troubled, either by spirit or by word or by letter, as if from us, as if the day of Yah has come, the wrath of the Lamb, not the return of Messiah, the wrath of the Lamb has already come. Let no one deceive you in any way. So he's saying, listen, he's giving them the timeline is really what he's doing. He's saying, listen, don't be deceived. We talked about this before. Let's get our thoughts straight here. Do not let anyone deceive you. So someone evidently deceived them. Do not let anyone deceive you in any way, because the falling away is to come first. And obviously there's more after that, but we'll deal with that another day. Let's deal with the falling away first. So before the day of Yah, before the Lamb's wrath, before the destruction of Jerusalem, there must be a falling away. So what does that mean? And this idea of the destruction of the temple was a major theme. Saul would have told the Thessalonians about this. He would have told the Ephesians about it. He would have told the people in Smyrna. He would have told every congregation, just like Peter would have told. Just like we know that was a major theme right after the resurrection, because we saw, I think it was last week in Acts chapter 6. This is the stoning, the court case against Stephen. And look at the witnesses they bring against him. Chapter 6 of Acts, verse 14. For we have heard him saying that this Yeshua of Nazareth shall overthrow this place. Yeah, they heard them. Why? Because they were preaching it. All the disciples were preaching it. Yeshua preached it the whole, last 4 days of his resurrection, before his resurrection. And I'm sure he preached it many times after that. This temple is coming down. So you got the disciples now saying this temple's coming down. That was a major theme. And the Pharisees and scribes and Sadducees and the Sanhedrin, they used it against Stephen. So I just want you to notice that this was a major theme. Now, as we're reading the gospel accounts, we're reading the accounts of them telling the people, look, Yeshua came, he died, and he rose again, and you need to come to him. Yes, because that's core. But they also preached this. They also told them this, and we know it because this is the conversation he's having in 2 Thessalonians. And change the institutes which Moshe delivered to us. And Yeshua didn't come to change the institutes that Moses gave to them. He came to change the institutes that they were doing of the traditions of the fathers, because they weren't following what Moses had actually delivered to them. Another story, another day. So let no man deceive you in any way, because the falling away comes first. Now that word falling away in the Greek, and again, it depends on what version you're looking at. Here, it's falling away. It can be falling away. It could be the word apostasy. Same word, right? And it is. You can check it out in your concordance. I just put the definitions up there so you guys can see them. The Greek number 646 is apostasia, coming from the root word apostasion, and it means defection from the truth. To fall away, to forsake. Apostasy. That's what apostasy means, to forsake, to fall away. It's Hebrew equivalent is Hebrew 5627, and it's the word kara. And kara means apostasy, a crime, a continual rebellion, a revolt, to turn or to fall away, that which is wrong. So these two words, both the Greek version of it and the Hebrew version of it, are compatible with each other. They mean essentially the same concept, the same idea. So we're reading, he's telling us that before the master comes, there must be a falling away, a great apostasy. Now, in the modern world today, right? In the modern concept, the modern idea of reading these verses, people read that, and again, we have this tendency to make it all about us because we think it's this end of the age thing. It's 2,000 years later, 7-year tribulation, 3.5, whatever version of it that it is that you've heard, and we have this idea that the great falling away is a falling away from Christianity, is a falling away from what we perceive God to be today. And listen, I can understand that concept because look around us. There's a great falling away everywhere. But it's there's more to it than just the idea of great falling away from Christianity, because that's part B of the story I said we're going to do a little bit later. That's the second part that Saul's going to talk about, but we're not going to get there tonight. So again, put that in the back of your mind. We'll talk about this next week. But this rebellion, this apostasy, this falling away, we think of it as, well, it's what's going on now today, right? It's what's going to go on just before Messiah comes. And again, true enough, there has been a rebellion, a falling away for a long, long time. But that's not what this is talking about. That's not the context of what the writer is speaking about. He's speaking about that day, that people, what Yeshua said on that generation, for all they have done, for all the affliction that they are afflicting the Jews and the Gentiles who are believers in the way, for all that they are afflicting them with, affliction will come upon them. Why? Because of their apostasy, because of their rebellion. Here is why. Here's Deuteronomy chapter 13. You guys should be familiar with this. We're going to read through a good portion of the chapter, but I want you to see this in a little bit different context than normal, because normally we use this as, okay, you got to judge a prophet by this, and you do. Yeah, it's about that, but it's about so much more than that. So much more than that. Listen to what chapter 13, verses 1 through 5 says. When there arises among you a prophet or a dreamer of dreams, and he shall give you a sign or a wonder. Just like Yeshua said, false prophets are going to come and they're going to produce signs. What kind of signs? Well, if a guy produces an army of 400 or 500 people, that's a pretty powerful sign. He's got an army behind him. He must be the Messiah, right? He shall give you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or a wonder shall come true, of which he has spoken to you, saying, let us go after other mighty ones. So let's define this for a second. It's not just that somebody says something's going to happen and it happens. It's that whether it happens or not, what they are telling you to do is outside of what Yah has commanded. So it doesn't matter if what the prophet says happens or doesn't happen. Ultimately, they are leading you away from what Yah has said to do. Whether it's a miracle, a sign, a wonder, an instruction, a prophet, preacher, whatever it is, if they are leading you away from Yah, that's the context of this. That's what you've got to watch out for. That's the Deuteronomy 13 test. Not just that they talk to you, not that just they have really interesting things to say, but when you think about the whole thing that they're saying, is this drawing me to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to be obedient to all that he has said, or is this drawing me away from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And if it's drawing me away from the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then it is drawing me to another God, a different thing, which is going to be a big, big part of what happens in the second part of, I'm so sorry, guys. I didn't realize that thing was on. It's going to be a really, really big, a big part of the second part when we get to next week, talking about the lawless one. So let's go on here. It says, "And the sign or wonder shall come true, which if he has spoken, let us go after other mighty ones, which you have not known, and serve them. Do not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams, for Yah your Elohim is trying you to know whether you love him. Whether you love Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, walk after Yah your Elohim and fear him, and guard his commandments and obey his voice and serve him and cling to him." And look at verse 5, guys. Look at verse 5. Look at the definition he's given us. "And that prophet or that dreamer of dreams is to be put to death, because he has spoken apostasy." Let that sink in a second. That's a moment. Let that sink in. Deuteronomy 13 is our warning against apostasy. He has spoken apostasy, rebellion, a falling away from Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim and ransomed you from the house of bondage to make you stray. There it is, fall away, be apostasy, to make you stray from the way in which Yah, your Elohim, commanded you to walk. Thus you shall purge the evil from your midst. It goes on. And it gets really, really detailed and intricate here. And I got some PDP versions in there for you guys to hopefully get a little bit more clarity on this. It says, "Whether your brother or your sons or your mother or the son of your daughter or the wife of your bosom or your friend who is in your own being, who is as your very close friend, entices you secretly, saying, 'Let us go and serve other mighty ones which you have not known.'" Now, how does that translate? Yeah, let's do this. It's for God. It's for the Lord, but it's outside of keeping his commandments. It's not doing what he said to do. It's another God. And he tells us, it doesn't matter who tells you to do this. Doesn't matter who gives you this information. Let us go and serve other mighty ones which we have not known. This is why the master says, "I have not come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. Mother against father, and father against son, and et cetera, yada, 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 yada." You guys know the verse. I didn't even put it up there, whatever verse it is. Maybe somebody can find that and put it up in the chat room. I should have given you a verse for it, but I just quoted it. Hopefully you guys know that. This is what Yeshua is talking about. This is exactly what Yeshua is talking about, Deuteronomy 13, and not falling for the apostasy. "Neither you and your fathers," verse 7, "of the mighty ones of the people which are all around you, near to you, or far off from you, from one of the end of the earth to the other end of the earth." So the issue here is that if you commit apostasy, if you fall into apostasy, then it is easy then to begin to follow other gods of the other nations. Guys, this is going to be so big in understanding the lawless one, what is coming, what the next step of the story is. It's all defined here in Deuteronomy 13, the progression of events. You follow the apostasy, and before you know it, you will begin to accept these other gods. You're going to be led down that road of rebellion. Verse 8, "Do not agree with him or listen to him, nor shall your eye pardon him, nor spare him or conceal him, but you shall certainly kill him. Follow after me." Follow me. Follow me is what he's saying. Don't follow anything else. "Your hand is first against him to put him to death." Boy, these are harsh rules, guys. This is harsh. "And afterward the hand of all the people, and you shall stone him with stones." It's very interesting. You get to Revelation chapter 16 and verse 21, and what falls on Jerusalem, or what fell on Jerusalem already? Great hailstones fell upon men, each hailstone weighing about the weight of a talent. He's talking about the trebuchets, the slingshots, Can't even think of what the word is, but trebuchet is a catapult. That's the word I was thinking of. The rocks that the Romans threw at Jerusalem to knock down the walls. That's what Revelation chapter 16, verse 21 is talking about. But it's also being given to us in the context of ancient Israel, of what you must do if someone in ancient Israel brings apostasy. Until he dies, because he sought to entice you away from Yah, your Elohim. Again, this is going to become really important when we get to Revelation 13. We start to understand the story of the beast and all the rest of that. Messiah tells us, you don't have the Son, you don't have the Father. You can't mix it with other things. You don't have it. Yah, your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim and from the house of bondage, and let all Israel hear and fear, and not again do such evil matter like you did at Mount Sinai with the calf, and do not again do such evil matter as this is in your midst. And he's warning us because something's coming. Even though this is a Deuteronomy warning, this is a prophecy of how to guard yourself, because something else is coming. An apostasy is coming. A falling away is coming that is going to lead us to other gods, which is really what it's all about. Here's verse 12, Deuteronomy 13. The story continues on. Let's listen to this. Verse 12 says, and this is, pay attention to this, guys. Really put on your spiritual thinking caps here. This is mind-blowing. When you hear someone, now again, PDP version, so you can put it into context of what we're talking about. When you hear someone, like the priests, like Caiaphas, like Annas, like the Sanhedrin, like the Pharisees, like the scribes, like the rabbis, when you hear someone in one of your cities in particular, because what are we talking about here at the end of the story? Jerusalem. When you hear someone in one of your cities, which Yah, your Elohim, gives you to dwell in, saying, some men, sons of Belial, sons of the devil. Well, didn't Yeshua call the scribes, the priests, the Pharisees, didn't he call them sons of Belial? You are of your father, the devil. Some men, sons of Belial, have gone out of your midst and led the inhabitants of your city astray. This is the accusation Yeshua makes against the scribes and the priests and everybody else, saying, let us serve other mighty ones. You're of your father. He's the one you're serving. You're not serving Yah. You're not Abraham's children. Mighty ones whom you have not known. They were mixing even the stuff of Rome. They were in bed with Rome. They were getting paid by Rome. Then you shall inquire, search out, and ask diligently. Court case has to go on, of course, in all of this. And see if the matter is true and established. Because what is it called when you commit apostasy? When you bring others to commit apostasy? When you bring them to whether it's signs or wonders or not, but you bring them to an understanding of a different God? Do you know what that is called? That is called an abomination. And to see if the matter is true and established, that this abomination, the abomination that lays the house desolate, that's what this is talking about. That this abomination was done in your midst. You shall certainly strike the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword. This is Luke 21, when you see Jerusalem surrounded. Why? Because the leaders are serving Belial, because the temple is full of the servants of Satan, because they're teaching my people abominations. They are an apostasy. This is what the master tells us in Luke 21. They will be put to the edge of the sword. What? The city will, and all those within it. And certainly strike the inhabitants of that city with the edge of the sword, putting it under the ban and all that is within it, the livestock, to the edge of the sword. Verse 16, and gather all its plunder in the middle of the street, and completely burn with fire the city and all its plunder. John the Baptist says, I come to baptize with water, but one comes after me who will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and with fire. And he will take his winnowing fork and he will burn up the chaff, but he will bring his wheat into the barn. That's what Deuteronomy 13 is telling us must be done to the people who are committing apostasy, because it is an abomination. Let's see, burn the city with fire before Yah your Elohim, and it shall be a heap forever, trampled, at least from our time frame, for the last 2,000 years, trampled underfoot by the Gentiles, and still is today. Never to be built again, at least not until Messiah returns. Jerusalem, and none of that which is put under the ban is to cling to your hand. Don't keep that Pharisaic Judaism, that thing that was there. Don't favor the old wine. Don't do that. Get rid of it. Do Moses. Follow the instruction. Understand who Yeshua is. Come by faith. Do not cling your hand, so that Yah turns from his fierceness and his displeasure and shall show you compassion. Get out of the city. Get out of it. Leave it. Love you and increase you, the people of the way, as he swore to your fathers. And verse 18, and what's the product of all of this? Why does all of this go on? Why is there going to be a city destroyed because of apostasy, because of a falling away that has made many fall away, the blind leading the blind? Verse 18, when you obey the voice of Yah, your Elohim, to guard all his commandments, which I command you today, to do what is right in the eyes of your Elohim. Guys, this whole Deuteronomy 13 is a prophecy of what would happen to Jerusalem. Yes, it was practical instruction for what they were supposed to do in their day, but it is a prophecy of what would happen in Jerusalem. All of these characteristics were met in the Gospels. They were sons of Belial. They were the blind leading the blind. Let them both fall into a ditch. They were teaching things that were the traditions of men. They were nullifying the word of Elohim. And even though Messiah dies for them and he calls for repentance for everyone, he still gives them another 40 years, a generation to change their ways. And what do they do for those 40 years? They tribulate the people of the way. They afflict the people of the way. They kill, they murder, they maim, they flog, they stone the people of the way. And those who afflict you, affliction will come upon them. Why? Because that's exactly what Deuteronomy 13 said would happen. Okay, I'm getting excited here. This is cool stuff, though. This is cool stuff. So that's the abomination. This is what Messiah is talking about, Matthew chapter 24. And now we get you hear all sorts of crazy things. The abomination of desolation is some guy who's going to sit in a temple and he's going to come out. No, we just read what the abomination is. We just read what the apostasy is. So in Matthew 24, when he says, so when you, I think it's around verse 15, somebody again could look it up for me. So when you see the abomination that lays waste, the abomination that causes the temple to be laid waste, it's not some guy in the future in another temple that means nothing to Yah. If they build another temple, it means nothing. It will have no value, zero value. Yeshua said that's done. Jerusalem's done. Temple's done. So even if another one is built, it has zero value. What he is saying is this temple, the one that you see, the guys that I just said, all the blood's going to fall on you. When you see the abomination that's been going on, continue to go on. And what's the greatest abomination? They plan to murder Yah. They planned to murder the God of Mount Sinai, and they did. They put him on a cross. Of course, he gives his life, but they planned murder against him. That's an abomination. They were mixing with the nations. They were having their people worship a different God than the God that was given to Abraham, the God that spoke to Abraham, and the God that spoke to Moses, because they were worshiping through a religion, through their own traditions. So when you see the abomination that lays waste spoken of by Daniel the prophet, again, he's not talking about a guy. We're going to get into Daniel because that's going to be part of the whole next thing. Set up in the set apart place. he who reads, let him understand. You got to understand, because you got to go back to Deuteronomy and find out what an abomination is. That which makes the temple desolate. That which they were doing in Yah's house that made it desolate. Chapter 23, Matthew, verse 37, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. What are you doing? Killing the prophets, stoning those who were sent to her. How often I wish to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chickens under her wings, but you were not. Why? Because you did all of these things. You were leading people to a different Elohim, not the Elohim that Moses spoke about, and you killed everyone who tried to steer you back towards Elohim. See, your house is left to you desolate. Because of your abominations leading to a different God, as is the definition of Deuteronomy 13, you committed apostasy. That is an abomination. And because of your abomination, your house will be desolate, destroyed. So here's I just summarized it, but let me just read to you what I got here. So when you see the city, this is me, this is just all me, but this is me sort of summarizing it. So when you see the city Jerusalem, that has killed Yah's prophets, including the Messiah, leading its people astray, the blind leading the blind, refusing to repent, and killing those, afflicting those, even Jew or Gentile, the people of the way, sent by Yah, now surrounded by her enemies, Rome. Because of her abominations, her falling away, her apostasy, she will be laid waste, and her house within her. That's the summary. That's really it, guys. That's the summary. This comes first. Let me leave you with one more verse. I know I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger, but let me leave you with one more verse that I hope is going to put a really wonderful picture in your mind of abomination. Here is an abomination. Leviticus 18, verse 23. And do not have intercourse with any beast. Now, of course, he's talking about bestiality here, right? He's talking about an actual physical dog, cow, camel, whatever, sheep, goat, whatever the issue is, right? And so you get that. But this is a prophecy. This is way beyond that. And do not have any intercourse with any beast. Well, what's the beast? Well, we know the man is from the gold to the bronze, right? From Babylon to Rome, who is also pictured as a beast coming out of the ocean, the lion, the bear, the leopard, etc., etc., etc. The Gentile nations, of which who rides the beast? The woman rides the beast. Jerusalem has intercourse with the beast. She is doing exactly what Leviticus 18 says not to do, to defile yourself with it. And a woman does not stand before a beast to mate with it. It is now here it says a perversion. It's an abomination. It's a perversion, but it's an abomination. Do not defile yourselves with all these, for by all these the nations are defiled, which I am driving out before you. Thus the land became defiled, therefore I punished it for its crookedness, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you, the people coming in, Israel, you shall guard my laws, my right rulings, and do not do any of these, what are they? Abominations. The native nor the stranger who sojourns among you, none of them. Because the men of the land who were before you have done all these abominations, and thus the land became defiled. So let not the land vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nations that were before you. For whoever does any of these abominations, a woman riding a beast, those beings who do them shall be cut off from among their people. And you shall guard my charge, so as not to do any of these abominations, abominable laws, which were done before you, so as to not defile yourselves by them. I am Yah, your Elohim. Jerusalem. You've all seen the pictures of Revelation. I should have put one up. I just didn't take the time to do it. You see the pictures of Revelation. There's a woman riding a beast. Now, she's riding on the top of it. That's not what riding means. It means having sex with. She had intercourse with the beast, with the nations, which is all the whole book of Ezekiel is about. And what is that? It's an abomination. And she brought it all the way into the temple, and it made it desolate. And so what does Yah do? The land vomited them out. He gave them 40 years to repent, but the land would vomit them out. I will leave you right there for tonight, guys. I'm sorry, I know, another cliffhanger, but it'll keep you coming back for next week. We got some really, really exciting stuff to talk about. I know I've given you a lot of stuff to think about. Go back over and read Leviticus 18. Go back to Revelation 17 and 18. You're going to see the comparisons. You're going to be like, oh my goodness, this is what Revelation was talking about. Yes, that's exactly what Revelation was talking about. So what comes first? The falling away, the abomination. And that came. It came with the killing of Messiah. It came with the killing of the apostles, and it lasted for 40 years until finally the law of Deuteronomy 13 had to be applied. The city had to be burned. And it doesn't matter. Have pity on no one. It doesn't matter. Have pity on no one. Everything gets burned. All the livestock, the animals, the buildings, everything gets burned. And that is exactly what happened to Jerusalem. Guys, Jerusalem really is the most, outside of Yeshua's death and resurrection, the most important biblical event, probably one of the most prophesied biblical events in all of history. Okay, I know I'm over time. I'm sorry, guys. I want to remind you again, if you are not subscribed, to please do that. Subscribe. We appreciate that. I hope you guys really enjoyed that study. Listen to it again. Go over it again. Get the notes. Download them. Go over each scripture slowly. Read it very, very slowly. Read it in multiple versions if you have to, and you're gonna be amazed. This story is absolutely marvelous, but it is not the story most of us have been told, but it is a story that is absolutely amazing. Guys, have a great night tonight. Join us tomorrow morning, early morning, for our morning manna. And of course, this weekend, we got a really neat hidden manna for you guys. Guys, have a great evening tonight. God bless and shalom.